Have you ever felt lonely in a room full of people? Not because no one was there, but because something in us didn't feel seen. We might be replying to messages, sitting with family or friends, working with people all day long, even laughing at the right moments, but still feel strangely alone. Now, that quiet ache of being present but not really known, that's the feeling or emotional response I wish to think about today. So, welcome to the Thoughtful Doctor, where medicine meets humanity. Now, over the past few episodes, we have been exploring human feelings as they show up in real life: shame, overwhelm, sadness, anxiety. But today, I want to talk more about loneliness, the feeling which most of us would have felt somewhere in life. Not just being alone, but the feeling of being unseen. Because loneliness and being alone are not the same thing at all. We can be alone and still feel peaceful. And we can be surrounded by people but still feel completely disconnected. Social isolation is about how many contacts or connections we have. However, loneliness is about how connected we actually feel. And that distinction matters a lot. Because sometimes we try to solve loneliness by adding in more people, more messages, more plans, more noise. But what we might actually be longing for is not more contact, it is more connection. So, loneliness doesn't always look like loneliness. I'll give you a recent example. I met someone in clinic who came in with symptoms that didn't fit neatly into one box. They were aches, tiredness, poor sleep, a sense that something just wasn't right. We did what we needed to do medically. We checked them, we examined them, we investigated. We made sure that we weren't missing something important. But the results didn't explain how much she was struggling. So at one point, I asked her gently, "Do you feel supported at home?" And she went quiet. Well, not for long, but long enough for the room to change. And then she started to cry. She told me that since her husband had died, she had felt completely lost. Not just sad, lost. Like the person who had witnessed her life was gone. And I remember thinking how often loneliness doesn't arrive saying I'm lonely. It arrives as tiredness, aches and pains, poor sleep, irritability, a heaviness we can't always explain. Now, sometimes the body carries what the heart hasn't had space to say. So, grief has its own kind of loneliness because sometimes we don't only miss the person, we miss being known by them. We miss the person who knew our routines, our moods, our silences, the small details no one else would ever notice. That is a different kind of absence, not just an empty chair, an empty witness. That is the quiet ache of feeling unseen. But loneliness doesn't only live in empty rooms. I remember speaking with another patient, a man in his 40s. On paper, his life looked full: work, family, children, responsibilities, a lot of people around him. The sort of life that from the outside might look connected. But as we explored, he said something that stayed with me. I don't think I've ever really felt listened to. And that sentence itself says a lot. Because we can be surrounded by people and still feel unseen. We can be successful and still feel unknown. We can be needed by others, relied on by others, even admired by others, and still feel like no one has paused enough to ask, what is it actually like to be you? Now, that is one of the quieter forms of loneliness, not the loneliness of an empty room, the loneliness of a full life where we don't feel truly met. Being surrounded is not the same as being seen. And success doesn't always protect us from loneliness either. Sometimes it just makes loneliness harder to admit. Because if life looks full from the outside, it can feel almost shameful to say that I feel lonely. But loneliness, is it a failure? Not at all. It is a human signal. And this is not just a soft emotional idea. Our brains and bodies are built for connection. So, psychologist Julianne Holt-Lunstad has done some important work on social connection and health. Her research found something very interesting. The people with social, stronger relationships had a 50% increased likelihood of survival compared with those with weaker social relationships. Her work is often summarized as showing that lacking social connection carries a health risk comparable to smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day. 15. Well, that sounds dramatic. But the point is not to frighten us. The point is that connection is not a luxury at all. It is a necessity, it is a part of health. We are not designed to move through life completely unseen. And here's the important part. The answer is not to be seen by everyone. It is not to have hundreds of people surround us or around us. It is not to become endlessly social. Sometimes what we need is one genuine connection, one person with whom we can be a little more real, one space where we don't have to perform, one moment where we feel heard. Because being properly seen by one person can matter more than being noticed by many. Now, a little bit more about the impact of loneliness. Because loneliness doesn't just hurt, it changes what we notice. When we feel lonely, the brain can become more alert to signs of rejection or disconnection. A delayed reply, a distracted face, a silence in conversation. Something that might usually feel small but can suddenly feel much bigger. Loneliness can make small silences feel like evidence. Evidence that we don't matter, evidence that we are being left out, evidence that we are not wanted. And often that evidence is not actually evidence. It is a lonely brain trying to protect us from more hurt. This is how loneliness can become a loop. Because we feel disconnected, then we become more alert to rejection, then we pull back a bit, and we become even more careful. We stop saying what we really feel. And then the connection becomes even thinner. Not because we don't want closeness, but because closeness has started to feel risky. And modern life makes loneliness strangely confusing because we are more contactable than ever. We can message, we can scroll, we can react, comment, like. Watch people's life in real time and still feel deeply alone. Sometimes we are over contacted but under-connected. Think about it. Social media can make this very confusing. On the surface, we know what everyone is doing, where they went, what they achieved, what they cooked, what their children did, what holiday they were on. But knowing about people is not the same as feeling close to them. Sometimes social media gives us the illusion of connection without the nourishment of connection. We can scroll through hundreds of lives and still feel like no one really knows ours. And there's another layer. Social media often shows us people when they are performing life, not necessarily when they are living it. We see the announcement, we see the celebration, the polished moment, but not always the quiet evenings. We don't see the difficult conversations, the uncertainty that goes behind, the loneliness behind that smile. But social media is not just bad in itself. It can help us learn, connect, find community, and feel less alone. But when it becomes a substitute for real connection, that is when it can leave us feeling strangely emptier. Like we have been near people all day, but not actually met by anyone. There's a difference between being updated and being understood. A difference between being reachable and being held in mind. A very clear difference between someone knowing what we are doing and someone knowing how we are. And I think many of us feel that difference. We might have hundreds of contacts in our group chats, work conversations, social media notifications, but still not know who to message when the feeling is, I don't feel okay tonight. That is a particular kind of loneliness. The loneliness of not knowing where our unfiltered self is allowed to go. There's also a part of loneliness that isn't just personal. Now, we used to have more informal spaces where connection could happen without needing to arrange it, like libraries, community centers, places of worship, local groups. These were called as third spaces. Not work, not home, the ordinary spaces where human connection quietly happens. And when those places become less available, less central, or harder to access, loneliness becomes easier to hide and harder to interpret. Because not all connection comes from deep conversations. Sometimes it comes from seeing familiar faces, being greeted by name, having somewhere to go where we are not performing, where we are simply part of something, a tribe. Because that matters. Loneliness is not only individual, it is also social. It is shaped by the way we live. the way we work, the way our communities are built, the way busyness becomes normal, the way everyone seems available online but harder to reach emotionally. So, what actually helps here? Well, I don't think the answer is simply let's go out and meet more people. Because sometimes that might help, but not always. Not always loneliness is solved by quantity. Usually and often it is eased by quality. One moment of being genuinely listened to can matter more than 10 shallow interactions. One honest conversation can do more than a whole evening of small talk. And finding connection doesn't have to start with a big emotional conversation. Mostly it starts smaller. Going somewhere familiar, joining a class or a group around something we already enjoy. Maybe sitting in a cafe, library, park, or community space where we can be near other people without needing to perform. Maybe volunteering, maybe messaging someone honestly, or asking one real question instead of staying in small talk. So, connection often grows through repeated, ordinary contact. Not one perfect conversation, not one grand gesture. Just small moments where we begin to feel a little more known. And it can start with a familiar hello, a message that says, I was thinking of you, a walk with someone where we don't have to fill every silence. Maybe a conversation where we say one honest thing instead of the usual, I'm fine. Because sometimes the way back from loneliness is not dramatic, it is gentle, it is repeated, and human. And this is where we can begin gently. Not by forcing ourselves to become more social, not by blaming ourselves for feeling disconnected, but by asking, where do I feel most myself? Who do I feel safe with? When do I feel seen, not just noticed? And also, where am I hiding behind I'm fine? Because many of us have learned to present well, to function, to be polite, to keep going. But being functional is not the same as being connected. We can be coping and still lonely. We can be busy and still lonely. We can be loved and still lonely if we don't feel emotionally met. And if that is where we are, it does not mean we are ungrateful. It means something in us is longing for connection that feels real. So let's make this small enough to actually try. Finish, here is this week's thoughtful doctor prescription. This week, reach for one moment of real connection, not more contact. Send one honest message, or maybe ask one real question. Let that one trusted person know a little more than I'm fine. It doesn't have to be dramatic. It might be as simple as I've been feeling a bit disconnected lately, or I could really do with a proper chat, or something like I don't need advice, I just need someone to listen. And if reaching out feels too much, you can start smaller. Go somewhere familiar, notice a kind exchange, let yourself register a moment where someone sees you, even briefly. Because connection is not always built in one big conversation. Sometimes it begins with one honest moment. So let's take a slow breath in and a gentle breath out. And hold this thought lightly. Loneliness is not always the absence of people. Sometimes it is the absence of being understood. And we do not need a crowd to begin healing that. Sometimes we just need one honest moment, one real question, one place where we do not have to perform. So until next time, we are not failing. We are just learning something we were never taught or we have never thought. Because the world moves fast, but understanding people and minds take time. Thank you and take care.